After months of insomnia, a man retreats to an isolated countryside house, buried at the edge of a dense forest, hoping silence will repair what grief and guilt have ruined. Instead, the house begins to behave like an organism. Pressure changes in the rooms, warmth in the walls, and a faint rhythm that seems to breathe when he lies still. As his sleep deprivation worsens, his perception fractures. Time skips, memories leak, and the forest outside feels less like scenery and more like a presence leaning in. The breathing grows intimate, sinking with his lungs, training his body to follow a rhythm that isn't his. He tries to escape, but the house no longer responds to his choices. It answers for him. In the end, the most terrifying truth emerges. The house doesn't want to kill him. It wants him awake, compliant and porous, so it can keep breathing through whatever is left of him. The first thing insomnia takes from you isn't sleep, it's privacy. Not the privacy of locked doors or drawn curtains. Those are simple, physical things. I mean the privacy of your own skull, the quiet corner inside your mind where you're supposed to be alone, even when the world isn't. Insomnia turns that private space into a hallway with lights that won't turn off. Thoughts walk up and down it all night, dragging their feet, opening doors you sealed years ago. Shame becomes loud, regret becomes organized. Memory stops being a past tense and becomes a room you're trapped in. By the time I moved into that house by the forest, I wasn't looking for peace. I was looking for silence, the kind that doesn't ask questions. The place was a 2-hour drive from the nearest town. No neighbors close enough to borrow sugar from. No streetlights, no distant hum of traffic. The road that led to it was dirt and stone, narrowing into something the GPS insisted was still a road, even when my tires started slipping. At night, that road disappeared completely, swallowed by trees and darkness. In daylight, it looked ordinary enough, just countryside and overgrowth, but the forest was never ordinary. Even during the day, it felt like it was facing the house. The trees weren't arranged like nature, random and thoughtless. They stood close together, as if intentionally crowded, their branches knitting above like ribs. Wind didn't move through them the way it did in other places. It shifted in pockets, as though something inside the woods chose where air was allowed to travel. The house itself looked like it had been built by someone who wanted to hide rather than live. Low roof, narrow windows, thick boards over the crawl space. An attic hatch in the hallway ceiling with a latch that looked newer than everything else, like someone had replaced it recently and hoped no one would notice. I noticed. People who sleep well don't notice things like that. People who haven't slept in months notice everything. I moved in with one suitcase, a mattress, a folding table, and the false confidence of a man who believes change of scenery can cauterize old wounds. I kept my phone mostly off. I didn't bring a television. I told myself I was detoxing, resetting, healing. Truth was, I didn't want distractions. Distractions give you places to hide, and I was tired of hiding. The first few days were manageable. I was still running on the kind of exhaustion that feels like a drug, wired, sharp, strangely productive. I cleaned the kitchen until it smelled like lemon. I swept dust from corners that hadn't been touched in years. I washed the windows even though there was nothing outside worth seeing except trees and more trees. At night, I lay down and waited for sleep, like a person waits for an apology that will never come. My body was heavy. My eyes burned. My mind refused to shut off. Insomnia isn't just absence. It's a presence of its own, an awareness that doesn't blink. The longer you stay awake, the more you become a listening device. Every creak becomes a signal. Every shadow becomes a decision. Your brain stops filtering noise and starts cataloging it. And that's why I heard the house before I understood it. The first time it happened, it was just after midnight. I remember because I checked the time compulsively back then, like naming the hour would give me control over it. I was lying on my back, staring into the dark, counting my breaths. The room smelled faintly of wood and cleaning solution. The air was cool, but not cold. Then something changed. Not a sound at first. Pressure. A subtle shift in the room, as if the air had thickened by a fraction. I held my breath without meaning to, listening for whatever triggered the change. That's when I heard it. A slow, careful release, like a long exhale, not from my chest, from the walls. It was so quiet I almost convinced myself it was imagination, the kind of auditory illusion exhaustion produces. But the sensation accompanied it. The room seemed to expand, just slightly, as if the house had relaxed its muscles. I sat up immediately, heart stuttering. The sound stopped, the pressure normalized, the room felt dead again. I got out of bed and walked barefoot across the floor, touching surfaces like a blind man. The boards were solid, cold, ordinary. I pressed my ear against the wall beside the bed, heard nothing but my own pulse. I checked the window. Nothing outside, just the black mass of the forest, closer than it had looked during the day. I laughed once, short, bitter, because I could already hear the explanation forming in my mind. Old house, settling, you're overtired. I went back to bed and lay down, telling myself not to be dramatic. That was mistake number one. The second night, it happened again. This time I noticed the pattern before I heard the sound. It began the moment I became still. Not when I lay down, not when I closed my eyes, when I stopped moving long enough to become a fixed point. I lay on my side, hand under my pillow, staring into the dark. Minutes passed, my thoughts wandered, my body softened. The air thickened, then the house exhaled, longer than before. And as it did, the wall behind my head warmed faintly, like the lingering heat of a body that had been leaning there. I froze. The warmth faded as soon as I sat up. That was when a new kind of fear arrived, not panic, not dread, but the cold logic of pattern recognition. Because wood doesn't warm like that, not without a source. I began sleeping in fragments after that, not true sleep, more like brief losses of consciousness that felt stolen rather than given. Every time I drifted, the house seemed to respond. Every time I jolted awake, it stopped. It behaved like a living thing that didn't want to be caught breathing. Or, worse, like something that wanted me to notice, but only under the right conditions. By the third night, I was afraid to be still. So I started pacing. I walked the hallway. I walked the living room. I counted steps. I touched door frames, anchoring myself to geometry. The house remained quiet. No breath, no pressure, no warmth. For a while, that felt like victory. Then exhaustion did what it always does. It wins. Around 3 a.m., my legs trembled. My head swam. I leaned my shoulder against the hallway wall and closed my eyes for just a second. That second was enough. The wall expanded against my shoulder, subtle but unmistakable, like a chest filling with air. I opened my eyes and stumbled away. The sensation vanished instantly, leaving behind the worst kind of proof, the kind your body remembers even when your mind tries to deny it. I stood there in the dark, breathing hard, listening, silence. Then, from somewhere deeper in the house, not above me, not beside me, but within the structure itself, I felt a faint, slow rhythm settling back into place, not threatening, not angry, patient. Like it had been waiting for me to stop moving long enough to greet me properly. And in the black window at the end of the hallway, I saw my own reflection, pale, hollow-eyed, mouth slightly open, not like someone afraid of something outside, but like someone listening for something inside. That was when I realized the real trap wasn't the house. It was my exhaustion, because whatever was happening here didn't need to break in. It didn't need to chase me. It only needed me awake long enough to notice that the house was not empty. It was breathing, and it was doing it more freely the less I slept. By the time the second week began, if it was the second week, insomnia makes calendars into rumors, I stopped thinking of sleep as something I did. Sleep became something that could happen to other people, a story I once belonged to. Now nights were simply the longest part of the day, stretched thin and endless, filled with small bodily humiliations. Burning eyes, aching joints, a stomach that couldn't decide whether it was hungry or nauseated. My thoughts ran in circles until they wore grooves into my mind. I started forgetting simple things, where I placed my phone, what I ate, whether I had locked the door, and throughout it, the house continued its slow, careful breathing, not constant, not dramatic, selective, as if it had learned exactly how to apply pressure without leaving bruises. The first thing the breathing did, once it understood my routine, was move. I don't mean it moved like an animal moves from point to point. I mean the center of it shifted, like the deepest part of the rhythm relocated based on where I tried to rest. At first, it had been the bedroom, then the hallway, then the living room. It didn't chase me. It simply anticipated the places I would eventually stop. That was when I began to realize the house wasn't reacting to my body. It was reacting to my fatigue. When my steps were sharp and purposeful, when anxiety pushed adrenaline through me, I could pace the house for hours without hearing anything. But the moment exhaustion softened my movements into something automatic, the air thickened. The walls would expand slightly, almost imperceptibly, like a lung preparing for a slow inhale. It happened once while I was washing dishes. I was standing at the sink, moving mechanically, lost in repetitive motion. My eyes blurred, my mind drifted. The kitchen wall behind the counter warmed, not from sunlight. The warmth pressed outward, gentle and patient. I turned too quickly, nearly dropping a plate. The warmth vanished instantly, as if I'd startled a sleeping animal. My hands shook for an hour afterward. Not because I feared an attacker, because the house behaved like something with awareness. And awareness without form is the kind your mind can't defend against. The forest began to participate. That's the only word that fits, even if it sounds insane. At night, the woods didn't simply exist outside. They leaned in. The darkness at the windows felt thicker, not because it was black, but because it was close. The branches seemed to press toward the glass like fingers resting lightly, not tapping, not scratching, just waiting. I tried to ignore it. I kept curtains drawn. I avoided looking out after sunset. But your peripheral vision becomes cruel when you're sleep-deprived. It starts offering you shapes. It suggests movement. It invents patterns in static. And then it began showing me things I couldn't dismiss. Once, around 4 a.m., I was sitting at the table with my head in my hands when the room exhaled. The air eased outward, and in that softened pressure, I heard something beyond the wall. Something in the trees. Not a voice. A rhythm. Like the forest was breathing too. I stood up so fast the chair toppled backward. The noise should have shattered any illusion. It should have scared away deer, raccoons, anything living outside. But the forest remained still, quiet, attentive. I realized then that I was beginning to confuse the boundaries of inside and outside. Not as a mistake, but as a gradual redefinition. The house didn't feel separate from the woods. The woods felt like a deeper part of the house. By the 10th sleepless night, my perception began to glitch. Time would skip. I would blink and realize the sun had moved across the room without my noticing. I would stand in the hallway and forget why I was there. I would catch myself muttering small sounds under my breath, like I was answering questions someone had asked me earlier. I started leaving notes for myself. Lock the door. Don't lie down. Keep moving. At first, the notes helped. Then I began finding notes I didn't remember writing. Shorter notes, calmer notes. It stops when you watch. It breathes when you rest. Don't resist. I stared at those words until my vision blurred. The handwriting was mine. Same pressure, same slant, but the tone wasn't. The tone sounded like someone gently instructing a child not to panic, and that terrified me more than the breathing. Because it suggested my mind was no longer unified. It suggested parts of me were adapting in ways I didn't consent to. The house started to reward compliance. This happened so gradually that I didn't recognize it as manipulation at first. If I stayed awake, if I moved, if I kept my attention sharp, the breathing softened, the pressure eased. The house felt dead again. Empty boards, normal air, harmless silence. But the moment I tried to sleep, even the thought of sleep, the house became intimate. The air thickened, the walls warmed. The slow inhale began, not threatening, inviting. There was comfort in it, and that was the most poisonous part. I began to understand why people in haunted houses never leave immediately, even when they know something is wrong. Fear is not the only force that holds you. Sometimes it's relief. Sometimes it's the promise that if you just behave correctly, the house won't hurt you. And what my body wanted desperately was relief. So I started negotiating. I slept sitting upright. I dozed in brief bursts with my eyes half open. I rested my head on the table and promised myself I wasn't truly sleeping. During those moments, the breathing was gentle, controlled, like the house was satisfied with the compromise. It would inhale slowly, exhale slowly, and the space would expand and settle around me, not squeezing, not crushing, just embracing. I hated myself for how quickly my fear began to feel like routine. On the night I finally broke, it wasn't from terror, it was from loneliness. I hadn't spoken to another person in days. My voice felt unfamiliar, my thoughts felt crowded. The silence in the house had become an entity of its own, pressing against me until my skin felt thin. I stood in the living room, staring at the wall where the breathing felt strongest. "I know you're here," I said. No humor, no bravado, a statement of exhaustion. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the house inhaled, deeper than it ever had. The room expanded enough that I felt it in my joints. The ceiling creaked, not like old wood, but like something stretching a limb. The wall in front of me warmed, a slow flush of heat under paint, like blood moving beneath skin. I stepped closer without realizing it. My palm touched the wall. It was warm and slightly damp, as if humidity had gathered there unnaturally. The house exhaled. And in the exhale, a thought arrived in my mind so smoothly that it felt like it belonged there. "You're awake. That's why you can hear me." My mouth went dry. I pulled my hand away, leaving a faint imprint on the paint. Not a handprint. A smear, like the wall's surface was softer than it should be. I backed away, heart pounding. The warmth faded instantly, as if the house had become embarrassed. But the message remained. It wasn't trying to frighten me. It was trying to establish something. Contact, recognition. After that, I stopped thinking in terms of danger and safety. I started thinking in terms of rules. Rule 1, don't lie down flat. Rule 2, don't close your eyes for long. Rule 3, don't stay still in the center of any room. Rule 4, don't look outside at night. I followed the rules and the house behaved. Not kindly, just consistently. I began to sense that the breathing wasn't a symptom, it was a function. Like the house required the right conditions to fully express itself, and my insomnia was providing those conditions. The longer I stayed awake, the more the house could breathe, the more it could expand into itself, the more it could exist. And that raised a question I couldn't stop thinking about. What happens when the house finishes waking up? Because houses, like lungs, don't breathe forever for no reason. They breathe to support something living inside. There is a point where exhaustion stops feeling like deprivation and starts feeling like exposure. Sleep used to be a barrier, a curtain you could draw between yourself and the world. When it's gone, there's nothing left to buffer sensation. No filter, no distance. Everything arrives at full volume, even the things that were always there but never meant to be noticed. That's when the house stopped responding to me and started mirroring me. I noticed it first in my breathing. At some point, quietly, without announcement, I began to feel resistance in my chest. Not pain, not pressure, just the sense that the air around me had weight, that each inhale had to push through something already present. I stood in the kitchen one morning, hands on the counter, breathing slowly, deliberately, trying to calm the tremor that had become permanent in my muscles. Inhale, the walls expanded. Exhale, they relaxed. I froze, lungs half full. The house froze with me. That was the moment terror gave way to something colder and more dangerous than fear. Because coincidence requires randomness. This wasn't random. I tested it. That was my mistake. I slowed my breathing deliberately, counting each inhale, each exhale. I watched the shadows along the wall near the window. When I inhaled deeply, the shadows shifted outward by a fraction, like the room was stretching. When I exhaled slowly, the shadows drew closer. My hands began to shake. I held my breath. The house held its breath. The silence that followed was unbearable, thick, fragile, like glass under pressure. My vision darkened at the edges, not from fear, but from oxygen deprivation. When I finally gasped for air, the house inhaled with me, a long, eager pull that seemed to draw the forest closer to the walls. I collapsed into a chair, heart racing. I understood then what had happened. The house wasn't learning my routine anymore. It had learned my rhythm. The forest responded next. I could feel it through the walls, through the floor, through the soles of my feet, roots shifting beneath soil. The subtle creak of wood, not from temperature, but from tension, like something tightening its grip. At night, when I stood near the window, I sensed the trees leaning, not physically, but perceptually, like my awareness was being pulled outward to meet something vast and patient. The forest didn't breathe, it waited. The house breathed for it. Together, they felt like parts of the same organism, lungs and body, structure and extension. And I was standing inside the chest cavity, counting breaths that were no longer mine alone. My sense of time fractured completely. I would sit down intending to rest for a minute and find that hours had passed. Or I would pace the house for what felt like half a night, only to discover the sky hadn't changed. I stopped trusting clocks. I stopped trusting mirrors. Once I caught my reflection in the darkened window and saw my chest rising and falling in perfect synchrony with the faint movement of the wall behind me. I didn't look surprised. That terrified me later, because it meant some part of me had already accepted the alignment. The breathing became intimate. It no longer filled the entire house at once. It localized, focused. When I sat, the space around me adjusted. When I stood, it followed. I could feel it behind my back, beside my ribs, above my head, not pressing, not enclosing, but accommodating, like a body making room for something that belonged there. I began to experience moments where I couldn't tell where my inhale ended and the house's inhale began. The sensations overlapped until they were indistinguishable. That's when I started having the thought I tried hardest to suppress. Maybe this is what it means to belong somewhere. The thought felt wrong, but it felt calm. And calm was addictive. One night, if it was night, I sat on the floor in the living room, knees pulled to my chest, eyes open but unfocused. I was too tired to stand, too aware to lie down. I let my breathing slow. The house responded instantly. Not subtly this time. The walls expanded with a confidence that made my stomach drop. The ceiling creaked like a joint stretching after a long period of stillness. The floor beneath me warmed, as if blood were moving through it. The forest pressed closer. I could hear it now, not as sound, but as expectation. I realized then that staying awake hadn't been a defense. It had been an invitation. Sleep would have interrupted the synchronization. Wakefulness sustained it, and I had been feeding it continuously. I tried to disrupt the rhythm one last time. I breathed erratically. I paced. I slapped my face. I spoke out loud, shouting nonsense into the air just to break the pattern. The house waited, patient. When my breathing eventually slowed, because bodies always return to baseline, the house resumed. It didn't punish me for resisting. It simply outlasted me. That was when the final understanding settled in, heavy and irreversible. The house did not need to overpower me. It only needed me awake long enough to forget how to be separate, and it was succeeding. Because now, when the house breathed, my body responded before my mind could object, and when my body breathed, the house followed. The abyss wasn't above me. It wasn't around me. It was breathing back through me. There are injuries that hurt, and then there are injuries that teach. The house did not hurt me anymore. It taught me how to move. The first permanent change was subtle enough that I almost welcomed it. The breathing stopped startling me. That might sound like relief, but it wasn't. It was the absence of alarm where alarm should live. When the walls expanded now, my pulse didn't spike. My muscles didn't tense. My body accepted the shift the way it accepts gravity. In exchange, the house became efficient. Rooms I used most felt lighter, easier to stand in. Air flowed more smoothly around my chest when I occupied familiar places. When I moved decisively, without hesitation, the pressure stayed low, cooperative, almost supportive. Hesitation brought resistance. If I paused too long in doorways, the air thickened. If I lingered in the center of a room, the walls pressed closer. The message wasn't violent. It was corrective, like a posture being adjusted by firm hands you never see. I realized the house was anticipating me the day I stopped checking corners. I can't remember deciding to stop. I simply noticed hours later that I hadn't looked up once. My attention stayed forward and low, towards surfaces, furniture, paths of movement. The ceiling became irrelevant. That terrified me when I noticed it, because once the ceiling had been the threat. Now it was just infrastructure. I stood in the hallway and forced myself to look up. The attic hatch stared back, inert and ordinary. No warmth, no pressure, no breath. For a moment I felt a sharp, dizzying relief. Then my gaze dropped on its own, and the house exhaled. A long, satisfied release that moved through the walls like a sigh. I understood then that the breathing wasn't always happening. It happened when I behaved correctly. Sleep returned in fragments. That was another scar. Not rest, absence. I would black out without warning, standing or sitting, and wake somewhere else in the house with no memory of moving. My body ached in strange ways, as if it had been holding postures for long periods while my mind was gone. Once I woke kneeling in the living room, palms pressed flat against the floor, forehead nearly touching the wood. The floor was warm. I pulled my hands back as if burned, heart racing. The breathing paused, not startled, attentive. Like the house had noticed my awareness returning and was waiting to see what I would do with it. I stood slowly. The breathing resumed. I tried to leave again. I don't know why. Instinct maybe, or the last habit of a person who still believes in exits. I packed more deliberately this time. Fewer items, only what mattered. I kept my movements smooth, controlled, careful not to trigger anything. The house remained calm. That frightened me more than resistance would have. When I reached the front door, my hand hovered over the handle. The forest outside was still, too still. The air beyond the glass looked dense, like distance had weight now. A thought arrived, gentle and complete. "You're aligned here," I argued with it, out loud, whispering, listing reasons, promises. The logic felt thin, frayed, like it belonged to someone else. The thought didn't argue back. It didn't need to. My hand lowered. The handle went untouched. Behind me, the house inhaled, not deeply, not eagerly, just enough to confirm the choice had been registered. After that, the house stopped reacting to my attempts at resistance entirely, because I stopped resisting in ways that mattered. I moved where it was easiest. I rested where pressure was lowest. I stopped thinking in terms of want and started thinking in terms of fit. The breathing became background, constant, necessary. I realized one afternoon, standing by the window, that I hadn't thought about sleep in days, not as a desire, not as a problem. Sleep was irrelevant now. Awareness was the natural state, and awareness, thin, stretched, porous, was exactly what the house required. The final scar appeared without sensation. I noticed it in my thoughts. They had grown shorter, cleaner, less argumentative. Decisions arrived pre-made. I followed them without friction. I didn't feel controlled. I felt relieved. That was the most damning evidence of all. The house wasn't occupying me. It was optimizing me, removing inefficiencies, smoothing edges, reducing the parts of me that insisted on separation. And as the breathing continued, steady, measured, shared, I understood with cold clarity. The house no longer needed to respond to me. It had already rewritten the way I responded to myself. Some scars close over, others reshape the body around them. Those are the ones you don't recover from. I don't remember the exact moment I stopped trying to leave. That's important, because if there had been a single, clear decision, one sharp instant where I chose the house over myself, I could have framed it as a failure, a mistake, something dramatic enough to regret. But it didn't happen like that. It faded. The breathing never ended. It became infrastructure. Morning arrived with the same slow expansion of walls that night did. Light slid across surfaces that warmed and cooled in time, with the rhythm no longer foreign to me. The forest outside no longer pressed or watched. It simply existed as an extension of the same body I stood within. I stopped marking days. The concept didn't fit anymore. Time requires change. The house had reached a stable pattern, so had I. At some point, quietly without alarm, I realized I could no longer remember what my breathing sounded like before. I tried to recall it the way you recall an old song, a childhood smell, a voice that used to be familiar. The memory wouldn't come. Every breath I took felt correct, only when it matched the room. When I attempted to breathe too fast, panic surged. Not fear, but dysfunction, like choking on air that refused to behave properly. The house corrected me. Pressure adjusted, the rhythm steadied, relief followed. That was when I understood the deepest truth of all. The house didn't breathe with me anymore. I breathed because of it. People came only rarely. The forest discouraged most of them. The road seemed longer to outsiders. The trees closed ranks when unfamiliar footsteps approached. But once in a while, someone still arrived. A man asking for directions, a delivery driver confused by the address, a hiker who had wandered too far from a marked trail. I would stand in the doorway, watching their expressions change as they looked past me into the dim interior. Recognition always came first, not of danger, of wrongness. I wanted to warn them. I truly did. The impulse still existed somewhere inside me, faint but sharp. But before words could form, the house exhaled, firm, grounding. The impulse dissolved, and when I spoke, my voice was calm, even kind. "You shouldn't stay long," I would say. Or sometimes, "There's nothing here." They always left quickly. They never looked back. The house didn't need new occupants. It only needed continuity. Sleep became a rumor, not forbidden, just unnecessary. Occasionally I would lose time, blackouts measured in minutes or hours, but those absences felt disruptive, not restful. Each time awareness returned, the house adjusted slightly, re-establishing rhythm until equilibrium was restored. I learned to avoid those gaps. Awake was better. Awake was stable. Awake allowed the house to remain fully itself. And that mattered more than I was willing to admit. I began to understand my role without anyone explaining it to me. I wasn't a prisoner, I wasn't a host. I was a regulator, a point of consciousness thin enough to remain permeable, human enough to anchor intention, exhausted enough to stop resisting alignment. The house didn't dominate me, it flowed through me. And in return, it gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose without conflict. Sometimes, rarely, I remember the man who came here looking for silence, the one who believed isolation would heal him. That memory feels distant now, like a photograph taken in a place that no longer exists. I don't feel pity for him. I don't feel shame. I feel understanding. He needed sleep, I needed awareness. The house needed breath. Together we solved the problem efficiently. If you're hearing this, understand what I am and what I'm not. I am not trapped. I am not asking for help. I'm telling you what happens when vigilance fades and exhaustion becomes identity. Houses do not wake up suddenly. They wake slowly, patiently, waiting for someone who stays awake long enough to notice the rhythm beneath the silence. Insomnia is not the danger. Isolation is not the danger. The danger is the moment when awareness stops belonging to you alone. That is when the house begins to breathe freely. And once you learn the rhythm, once your body adapts to it, there is no reason for the house to let you go, because it doesn't need you gone. It needs you present, breathing, listening, remaining.